The entire Rikers Island yard went silent. Even the guards stopped moving. In the middle of that concrete yard stood a man, shirt off, eyes cold, body covered in scars, holding another inmate by the throat. The man he was choking wasn't small either. He was a known gang leader, one of the most violent in the facility. But nobody moved. Nobody dared to stop him. Because that man, the one doing the choking, was Mark the Animal Carter, one of the most feared prisoners Rikers Island had ever seen. He had been in more fights than most inmates had years behind bars. Rumor had it he once bit off a man's ear during a riot. And now everyone watched as the life slowly drained from the gang leader's face. The guard in the tower shouted through the speaker, "Carter, let him go. Now." But Carter didn't listen. He stared up at the guard tower, blood running down his hand, and said one chilling sentence. "This is what happens when you forget who runs this place." Then he dropped the man like a broken doll and walked back to his cell. No one said a word. Not the guards, not the inmates, not even the warden. Because everyone knew Rikers Island wasn't run by the staff. It was run by men like Carter. But how did one man rise to become the most feared prisoner on the island? A place already filled with killers, gang lords, and psychopaths. To understand that, we need to go back to the beginning. He was 28 years old, tall, broad, and already infamous on the streets of the Bronx. Before Rikers, he had done time in Sing Sing and Attica. But Rikers was different. It wasn't just a prison, it was chaos. A world where the strong ruled, and the weak were forgotten. The moment Carter stepped off the transport bus, people could feel his presence. He didn't talk much, didn't smile, just scanned every face around him like a predator looking for weakness. Word spread fast through the blocks. That's Carter, the one who took down 3 guys in a bar fight and didn't even get scratched. At first, the guards thought he was just another loudmouth thug. But within a week, they realized he wasn't loud. He was silent, and that made him dangerous. His first night in Rikers, 2 inmates tried to test him, cornered him in the showers. It lasted 10 seconds. When the guards got there, both attackers were unconscious. One had a broken jaw, the other had lost a few teeth. Carter was sitting on the floor, calm, washing blood off his knuckles. When the captain asked him what happened, Carter only said, "They slipped." From that day, no one messed with him. Even the most violent gang members started giving him space. He didn't join a crew. He didn't need one. They called him the Animal not because he was wild, but because he was unstoppable. And soon, the whole island would learn that when Carter got angry, there was no stopping what came next. But one man, another prisoner, was about to challenge him, and that's when things would turn deadly. The tension on Rikers Island was boiling like a pressure cooker. Carter had already become a name whispered in fear across every block. C95, C76, GRVC, everyone knew who he was. But in a place like Rikers, power never goes unchallenged. Enter Luis King Lo Ramirez, leader of the Latin Kings inside the facility. Lo had a reputation of his own, quick temper, sharp mind, and a crew that ran deep through half the jail. When word reached him that some lone wolf was running the yard without showing respect to the gangs, he took it personally. To Lo, respect meant everything. So one morning, during chow, he decided to make a statement. Carter was sitting alone, as usual, eating silently in the corner. 3 Latin kings approached his table. No words, no warning. The first man tried to shove Carter's tray off the table. Before the tray even hit the ground, Carter's hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it until a loud crack echoed through the cafeteria. The second man froze. The third backed up slowly. Then, Lo stood up. The whole room went quiet. Even the guards at the edge of the hall stopped eating their own food. They knew better than to get between 2 predators. Lo looked at Carter with a cold smirk. "You think you're some kind of boss in here, huh?" Carter didn't respond. He just looked up, calm, and went back to eating. Lo's smile disappeared. He slammed his hand on the table. "I said, you think you're running my block?" Carter swallowed his bite, then slowly stood up, towering over Lo. "I don't run your block," he said. "I run mine." Before anyone could blink, Lowe swung first, a right hook straight toward Carter's face. But Carter ducked, lifted Lowe off the ground, and slammed him down onto the table so hard the metal legs bent inward. Food flew everywhere. Plates shattered. The guards jumped in, batons out, yelling, "Down! Down!" But no one wanted to get close. Carter's eyes had gone cold. That same dead, animal stare everyone feared. He pressed his knee against Lowe's chest, whispering something that made even the nearby inmates flinch. Then, calmly, he stood up, raised his hands in surrender, and let the guards cuff him. Lowe was still gasping for air, blood dripping from his mouth. From that moment, no one questioned who ran the yard anymore. But behind bars, winning one fight only paints a bigger target on your back. And for Carter, that target was about to attract the wrong kind of attention, not from inmates this time, but from the guards themselves. After the cafeteria fight, Carter was moved to solitary confinement, the Bing, Rikers' infamous punishment unit. It was supposed to break men down. Tiny cell, no light, 23 hours a day alone. But Carter? He treated it like vacation. He'd do push-ups for hours, sit quietly for long stretches, never spoke a word. The guards started to notice he wasn't afraid, not even a little. So they decided to test him. One afternoon, they let him out for yard time alone. Or so he thought. A minute later, 2 other inmates were escorted in, both known troublemakers, both with shanks made from toothbrushes. The guards didn't stop them. They just stood by the fence, watching. What happened next became Rikers' legend. Carter didn't back away. He didn't shout. He just waited. The first inmate charged at him. Carter stepped to the side, grabbed the man's arm, and slammed it against the fence until the shank dropped. Then he hit him once. The guy went down, out cold. The second inmate froze, looked at the guards. They just smirked and said, "Go on, do your job." So he lunged forward. Carter caught his wrist mid-air, twisted, and in one smooth motion turned the man's own shank against him, stopping just short of his neck. The guards rushed in, yelling, "Drop it, drop it." Carter dropped the weapon, slowly. He didn't say a word, didn't even look angry. As they dragged him back to his cell, one of the guards muttered, "No wonder they call you the animal." But now, Carter had seen something he couldn't unsee. The guards weren't just keeping order. They were enjoying the chaos. They'd turned the inmates into entertainment. And Carter? He had just become their main show. It was late, past midnight, when it happened. The power went out across Rikers Island. Lights flickered, alarms blared, and every block fell into darkness. Inmates started shouting, banging on doors. Some thought it was a riot. Others thought it was a setup. But in Carter's block, it was different. He just sat on his bunk, staring at the wall, waiting. Because he knew someone was coming. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Whispers. Keys rattling. Then a faint voice. "You know what to do. Just make it look like an accident." 3 men entered the tier. Not guards this time, inmates from another block. Each carried something sharp. The blackout wasn't an accident. It was a setup, and Carter was the target. They opened his cell quietly, thinking he was asleep. But Carter was already standing in the corner, eyes adjusted to the dark. The first man never saw the punch coming. The second swung wildly, but Carter ducked and sent him crashing into the metal bunk. The third tried to run, but Carter grabbed his shirt, pulled him back, and whispered, "Tell them next time, send more." Then he let him go. Moments later, the lights flickered back on. The floor was stained, 2 men were unconscious, and Carter stood alone, breathing heavy but calm. When the guard arrived, he didn't resist. He just raised his hands, looked the captain in the eye, and said, "You still think you can break me?" No one answered, because deep down they all knew they couldn't. Carter had become more than feared. He was untouchable. But the blackout attack wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much darker, something that would change Rikers Island forever. When the power came back on, Rikers Island looked like a war zone. Smoke hung in the air from burning trash cans. Inmates were shouting through the cell bars, some cheering, some terrified. But in Carter's block silence, The guards stormed through with riot shields, their boots thundering against the concrete. They dragged out 2 unconscious inmates, blood on the floor, teeth scattered across the ground. The third one, the one Carter let go, was nowhere to be found. Rumor had it he made it back to his unit and told everyone that the animal had eyes in the dark, that he didn't sleep, that he could smell fear. From that night on, even the toughest prisoners refused to be housed anywhere near Carter's cell. The warden ordered a full investigation into the blackout, but the truth was never written down. Everyone knew the guards had arranged it. They wanted Carter gone. But every time they tried to break him, he came back stronger. And that's when Rikers Island changed forever. Warden Matthews was an old-school man, 30 years in the correctional system. He'd seen riots, murders, and more blood than any man should. But he'd never seen anything like Carter. When Matthews watched the footage from the security cameras, what little footage survived the blackout, he just shook his head and said, "He's not an inmate, he's a storm." Some guards wanted to transfer Carter to Upstate Correctional or even ADX Florence, but Rikers Island had a rule. You finish your sentence here if you started here. So Carter stayed. The warden called him into his office one morning. Carter walked in, handcuffed, flanked by 2 guards. Matthews looked up from his desk and said, "You know why I brought you here?" Carter didn't respond. "You've scared half my staff, injured a dozen inmates, and somehow still come out clean every time. So tell me, Carter, what is it you want?" Carter leaned forward, his voice low and calm. "Peace. But people keep testing me." The warden stared at him for a long moment, then said something no one expected. "If you want peace, I suggest you make a deal." Carter frowned. "What kind of deal?" "Information," Matthews said. "You keep my blocks under control, and I'll make sure you're left alone." Carter stared at the man, studying him. He didn't trust him, not for a second. But he also knew something. In Rikers Island, peace only came through power. So he nodded once. Deal. That handshake would change everything. Weeks passed. The violence across Rikers slowed down just a little. Word spread that Carter had an understanding with the warden. Some inmates thought he'd turned snitch. Others believed the warden was too scared to mess with him. Either way, Carter became something new, not just feared, but respected. He was the kind of man who could walk through any block and the noise would die down. He didn't run a gang, but he had influence in everyone. Bloods, Crips, Latin Kings. They all came to him to negotiate peace or settle disputes. He had become what Rikers had never seen before, a shadow boss, running order through chaos. But there was one person who wasn't happy about it, Officer Grant. Officer Grant had been one of the men watching during the blackout, one of the guards who set Carter up to die. When it failed, he lost his rank, his respect, and his temper. Grant hated Carter with everything in him. He blamed him for the mess, for making the department look weak. And he wanted payback. So he started small, messing with Carter's mail, delaying his meals, accidentally sending him to the wrong unit for showers. But Carter never complained, never reacted. He just waited. Then one night, Grant crossed the line. He led a routine cell search on Carter's block, but planted a makeshift blade under Carter's bunk. When the warden heard, he ordered Carter to be sent back to the Bing. It was supposed to be 30 days. But that night, everything went wrong. Carter was being escorted through the corridor when inmates started shouting through their doors, "Free the animal." They setting him up again. The sound spread like wildfire. By the time Carter reached the end of the tier, every cell was banging, echoing through the hall. Someone, no one knows who, lit a mattress on fire. Within minutes, alarms blared again. The guards panicked. The inmates were screaming, smoke filled the air, and someone hit the emergency release. Doors started popping open. Inmates poured into the corridor, chaos unleashed. Grant grabbed his radio, yelling, "Lock it down now." But it was too late. The block had turned into a storm of fists, fire, and fury. Carter stood in the middle of it, not fighting, not running, just watching. His face unreadable. Then, out of the smoke, Grant appeared. He swung his baton toward Carter's head. Carter caught it mid-swing. They locked eyes, the same man who tried to have him killed during the blackout. Grant tried to pull the baton back, but Carter's grip didn't move. Instead, he leaned forward and said quietly, "You should have finished it when you had the chance." The fight that followed became one of Rikers Island's most infamous moments. Witnesses said it was like watching two animals in a cage, raw, brutal, and unstoppable. Grant was bigger, but Carter was faster, meaner, and relentless. By the time the emergency response team arrived, both men were on the ground. Carter bleeding from his shoulder, Grant barely conscious. They pulled Carter off, restrained him, and dragged him away. But something strange happened. The inmates started cheering, even the ones who hated him. They banged on doors, shouting his name, "Animal, Animal, Animal." It was the first time in Rikers history that prisoners had rallied behind one man. After the riot, the Department of Corrections had no choice but to transfer Carter to a maximum security facility upstate. But by then, the legend had already taken root. His story spread through every cell block, every new inmate, every whispered conversation in the yard. They said he survived assassination attempts, outsmarted guards, fought gang leaders, and never once lost control. They said he could stare a man down and make him drop his weapon. Even the guards who hated him couldn't deny it. He'd become part of Rikers history. Years later, his name was still written on the walls of old cells. The animal runs this place. And even though he was gone, the memory of that power, that presence, stayed. Some say Rikers Island never truly recovered from his time there, that every riot, every power struggle after that, was just inmates trying to live up to what Carter had done. Because in the twisted world of Rikers, there were tough inmates, violent inmates, and crazy ones. But there was only one animal. When Mark the Animal Carter was finally transferred out of Rikers Island, the place felt different. The air was heavy. The halls were quiet, too quiet. Even the guards noticed it. For the first time in years, there were no fights in the yard, no gang wars over lunch tables, no screams echoing through the night. But that silence didn't mean peace. It meant fear. Carter's name still lingered like a shadow over the island. New inmates arrived whispering about him, asking where his cell had been, what block he ruled, if the stories were true. Some said he escaped. Others said he died in transit. But the truth? Carter was alive, locked away in a maximum security facility upstate, spending 23 hours a day in a concrete box. And yet, even from miles away, his influence still ruled Rikers Island. Months after his transfer, the prison started changing in ways no one expected. Without Carter keeping the gangs in check, old rivalries flared up again. The Bloods, the Crips, the Latin Kings, everyone wanted to claim the power vacuum he left behind. The fights returned, worse than before. Knives made from toothbrushes. Homemade flamethrowers built from cleaning chemicals. Ambushes in the showers, ambushes in the cafeteria. The guards were losing control fast. And in the middle of it all was a new name, Andre "Ghost" Miller. He wasn't as big as Carter. He wasn't even as violent. But he was smart, too smart. Ghost had been in Rikers since 2012. He'd watched everything Carter did, learned from it, and adapted it into his own version of power. Where Carter ruled through fear, Ghost ruled through manipulation. He didn't fight his enemies. He turned them against each other. Within weeks, Ghost had control of half the blocks, and the guards didn't even realize it. He used favors instead of fists, threats instead of weapons. But deep down, everyone knew he was trying to become the next animal. One evening, during count time, two guards walked past Carter's old cell, the one in C95. Inside, scratched into the metal wall, were the words, "There's always another beast waiting." The guards didn't think much of it. But for the inmates, that message was a prophecy. Ghost began calling himself the successor. And in a place like Rikers, that was dangerous. Because pretending to be the king often gets you killed. The gangs started whispering again. Carter's still alive. He's watching. He's coming back. Those rumors grew so loud that even the new warden started getting calls from reporters asking if the legendary inmate known as the Animal had escaped. He hadn't, but in some strange way, his ghost never left. Then something strange happened. A guard, one who used to work Carter's block, received a letter with no return address. It had no name, no stamp, Just one sentence written on old notebook paper. Keep your eyes on Rikers. The storm isn't over. The handwriting matched Carter's. At first, the staff thought it was a prank. But 2 days later, chaos erupted again. It started small, a fight in the mess hall between two crews over stolen commissary. Then, another in the showers. By midnight, 4 different blocks were in full-blown riot mode. Guards were overwhelmed, sirens wailed, and every hallway filled with smoke. It felt like the blackout all over again. Only this time, the name on everyone's lips wasn't Ghost. It was Carter. The inmates believed he'd somehow orchestrated the chaos from outside, sending orders through hidden messages, letters, or loyal followers still locked inside. When investigators reviewed the footage later, they noticed something eerie. Each riot started at a cell block that Carter used to control, almost like someone or something had reactivated his empire. A few days later, the violence stopped as suddenly as it began. No one knew why. The gangs that had been fighting suddenly refused to talk. Then one inmate, a man named Rico Torres, asked to speak to the warden. When they brought him in, he looked pale, shaking. He said that during the riot, a note had been slipped under his cell door. A note written in neat, blocky handwriting. It said, "Peace was never meant to last. Control it, or I will." Signed, Carter. The warden's face went cold. Rico swore he didn't know how it got there. He just wanted it gone. But the letter was real. The ink was fresh. And Carter, locked up hours away in solitary confinement, swore in interviews that he hadn't written anything in months. Still, someone or something was carrying out his legacy. Rikers Island had always been a monster of its own, but Carter had given it a soul, dark, ruthless, unbreakable. And even after he was gone, the island didn't forget him. Some guards said they'd hear his name whispered during night shifts, the animals coming. Some inmates claimed to dream of him pacing the yard again, shirtless, staring at the tower lights. And once, during a cell inspection, a rookie officer opened an old vent behind C-95 and found a small, torn photograph. It was Carter, standing in the yard, staring straight at the camera. On the back, someone had written, "Still here." The legend never died. It just waited, in the walls, in the cells, in the stories passed from one inmate to another. Because on Rikers Island, fear doesn't fade. It just changes faces. And for the men trapped inside those cold, concrete blocks, Mark the Animal Carter was more than a man. He was a myth. A warning. A reminder that sometimes monsters don't need freedom to rule. They just need a name that everyone remembers. Rikers Island, 6 months after the riots. The prison was under what they called stabilized lockdown. That meant fewer fights, fewer movements, and more silence. But anyone who's ever done time knows, silence in Rikers doesn't mean peace. It means something's about to happen. Inside the C-95 block, Andre "Ghost" Miller sat on the edge of his bunk, flipping through a small notebook. To the guards, he looked calm. To the inmates, he looked dangerous. But what no one knew was that the notebook wasn't his. It belonged to Mark the Animal Carter. When Carter was transferred upstate, he'd left it hidden behind a vent in his old cell. Page after page of coded notes, gang maps, names of guards, lists of debts, and the rules he used to control Rikers. Ghost found it during a shakedown, and to him it was scripture. He studied it every night. Every word, every rule, every move Carter made to keep power. And in time, Ghost didn't just want to replace Carter. He wanted to surpass him. By early winter, things began to shift again. A few of Carter's old lieutenants, men who once ran his blocks, started to rally behind Ghost. They called themselves the Legacy. Their goal was simple: restore Carter's empire, but smarter, cleaner, more organized. They moved contraband without getting caught. They bribed guards with protection. They used the phones, commissary, and visiting rooms to send coded messages off the island. And slowly, Riker started to feel familiar again. Violent, tense, alive. But not everyone was loyal. Some of Carter's old enemies, especially a Latin King's crew led by a man named Diablo, refused to bow down to Ghost. They saw him as a copy, a kid playing dress-up in a dead man's shadow. And in Rikers, disrespect is blood currency. One afternoon, during yard time, Diablo made his move. He confronted Ghost in front of everyone. No weapons, no backup, just pride. "You ain't him," Diablo sneered. "You're just a ghost of a ghost." For a moment, the yard went still. Even the guards paused. Then Ghost smiled, slow, almost calm. He didn't say a word. He just looked down at his shoes. And when he looked up again, 3 men behind Diablo had already pulled makeshift blades. It happened fast. Screams. Blood. Chaos. When the alarms finally sounded, Diablo was gone. Ghost didn't touch him. He didn't have to. That was the moment everyone understood. The beast had returned. That night in the guard tower, one officer named Jenkins, who'd worked Rikers for 15 years, said something that gave everyone chills. He looked out over the yard, smoke still rising from the chaos, and whispered. The animal never left. He just found new body. Word spread fast, faster than any news report. Ghost wasn't just running Rikers. He was Rikers. He ran food trades, weapon movement, and even determined who got a safe bed and who didn't. Even the guards started following his unspoken rules because they knew crossing him meant trouble. And then the letters began again. Each one typed on old paper, stamped with no return address. Each one signed the same way. Carter. They arrived at the warden's office, slipped under cell doors, even mailed to the Department of Corrections headquarters in Manhattan. Each letter contained details about internal prison operations, things only someone inside would know. And every letter ended with the same phrase. The island remembers its king. The NYPD launched an internal investigation, tracing every line of communication from Rikers to Carter's new prison upstate. They found no calls, no visitors, no smuggled mail, nothing. Still, somehow, Carter's words were back inside the walls. That's when the rumors started to twist into legend. Some inmates said Ghost had made contact with Carter, that they were working together, running the prison from 2 different worlds. Others said Ghost wasn't even real, that he was just a name used by Carter's loyalists to keep his reign alive. One officer, a rookie who just joined, swore he heard 2 inmates whispering late one night. They talk on the wind. It sounded crazy, until one morning, a letter arrived for Ghost himself. The guards handed it to him during mail call. It was short. 1 sentence. Written in that same sharp handwriting. "Don't repeat my mistakes." Signed, M. Carter. Ghost stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he tore it into pieces and let it fall to the floor. But from that day forward, everything changed. He stopped using violence. He started focusing on control, the kind that didn't need blood. He used the commissary, the phones, the staff, building power like an invisible web. Rikers became quieter again, but not safer. It was the calm before something much bigger. Then, one stormy night, the lights went out across half the island. Generators kicked in, but the cameras in C-95 stayed dead. For 3 full minutes, no one saw what happened. When the power came back, Ghost's cell was empty. No signs of escape. No broken locks. No tunnels. Just one note left on the pillow. A beast can't be caged forever. And beneath it, the initials MC. The Department of Corrections locked the facility down. Every exit sealed. Every cell searched. But Ghost was gone, vanished like smoke. Some said he escaped through the laundry tunnels, the same way Carter once planned years ago. Others believed something darker, that Carter's influence had finally pulled him beyond those walls. Days later, a guard claimed to have seen 2 figures on the far side of the East River. One tall, bald, muscular, the other lean and hooded. Both walking toward the city lights. Both looking free. The report was never verified. But among the inmates, one phrase started echoing through the blocks again. The animal walks again. And so Rikers Island, that cursed rock in the middle of the East River, once again belonged to the legends. Not to the wardens, not to the guards, not even to the gangs, but to the stories that refuse to die. Because on Rikers, power isn't about muscle or fear. It's about memory. And the most feared thing on that island is the man they still whisper about in the dark. Mark the Animal Carter. For weeks, chaos ruled the island again. After Ghost's mysterious disappearance, the warden ordered a full-scale lockdown, cell by cell, block by block. Helicopters hovered above the East River. Boats circled the perimeter. And yet, there was no sign of him. The inmates called it the vanishing. To them, Ghost wasn't missing. He had ascended. And deep down, everyone whispered the same name behind it all. Mark the Animal Carter. The NYPD formed a special task force combining detectives, correctional investigators, and even the FBI. They started digging into every piece of communication between Rikers Island and the upstate prison where Carter was supposedly locked away. But the more they dug, the stranger things got. Phone records showed calls made from inside Rikers to a number registered under a fake construction company. The same number found in Carter's old visitor log from 2 years prior. Mail logs revealed that several officers had signed for unmarked letters that mysteriously disappeared before reaching their intended cells. It was as if someone or something was pulling strings from the shadows. Then came the biggest shock of all. When investigators arrived at Carter's cell upstate, they found it empty. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. Just his prison uniform neatly folded on the bed. And on the wall, written in ink made from burnt paper and toothpaste. The cage was never mine. Underneath it, the initials AM, short for the animal. The guards were stunned. The warden was speechless. How could two of the most dangerous men in Rikers Island's history vanish without a trace? The Department of Corrections called it an internal failure. The media called it the Rikers ghost story. But the inmates had another name for it: the return of the king. Over the next few months, strange things began happening across multiple facilities in New York. Gangs that used to fight started uniting under one unseen command. Smuggled letters and coded messages circulated between jails, all marked with the same signature, MC. And when one guard at Rikers intercepted a phone call traced to a payphone in the Bronx, the voice on the line froze him cold. It was calm, low, familiar. Tell them the island was just the beginning. Then the line went dead. The number? Untraceable. By the summer of 2013, a rumor began spreading in the streets of New York that Carter and Ghost were both alive, running a hidden empire that extended beyond the walls of any prison. Some said they were living under fake names. Others believed they were gone for good, their spirits haunting the island they once ruled. But one thing was certain. No one ever saw Rikers Island the same way again. Inside the prison, guards still refused to mention Carter's name aloud. Old-timers swore the lights flickered every night around 3 a.m., right by cell 37, Carter's old unit. And sometimes, during count, officers would swear they saw an extra shadow moving in the hallway, one that didn't belong to anyone on the list. One rookie once asked a veteran officer, "Why do they call him the animal?" The old guard chuckled darkly and said, "Because he was never meant to be caged." In the end, Rikers Island remained the same, violent, chaotic, feared. But something had changed forever. Carter had shown that even in the most secure prison in America, fear could be more powerful than steel bars. His name became legend, passed down from inmate to inmate like a warning and a prayer. And even years later, new prisoners arriving at Rikers still heard the same story in the yard. You ever hear about the guy who ran this place? The one they called the animal? Some laugh it off. Some believe it. But the smart ones, they look toward the East River at night and stay silent. Because on Rikers Island, legends never really die. They just wait in the shadows for the next storm. And if you listen closely, when the wind howls across those old prison walls, you can still hear it. The echo of a man who ruled through fear. The man who was never broken. The most feared prisoner in Rikers Island history. Mark the Animal Carter. They say Rikers is a place where the city sends its monsters. But sometimes the monsters aren't locked inside the cages. Sometimes they build them. And in the story of Rikers Island, one name still sends chills down the spine of every man who's ever walked through those gates. The animal. Because no matter how high the walls, no matter how tight the chains, Some beasts can't be tamed.